There are worlds beyond my own.
You know, one major issue that fans of the Marvel Cinematic Universe have had to discuss in regards to the future of the franchise is how the heck they are possibly gonna top the threat that was Thanos. I mean, come on. This is a guy who possessed the power and, more importantly, the drive to decimate half of everyone living everywhere. Well, it is totally possible that we might have already seen our next big bad. What If showed us the threat of different reality versions of previously dealt with enemies with the rise of Infinity Ultron, the version of the big bad bot that won against this universe's Avengers, and managed to take the rest of the Infinity Stones from the Mad Titan himself. So who, among all of the different villains we've seen in previous MCU films, could be the one that's gonna step up to the plate? Well, let's take a look at a few different possibilities and discuss. Also, spoilers for stuff such as What If in this video. If you aren't totally caught up with all things Marvel, I'd click away and watch this later if I were you. Let's just get this big guy out of the way right out of the gate. Infinity Ultron himself. Sure, in the 9th episode of What If, we saw him get taken out by the digital version of Hydra scientist Armin Zola in a fairly definitive way. That is a solid point in the probably not gonna happen column. However, this is the multiverse we're talking about. It is completely possible that, since we saw that the rise of Infinity Ultron happened in one universe, it could have happened in another one. We are talking about an infinite number of possibilities across an infinite number of worlds. So there is no telling what could have happened out there. There could be a world where Ultron won just like we saw in What If, except he took out Thanos in a slightly different way or something, giving us a minorly different alternate version. That would allow us to get a major multiversal threat without undermining what we saw in that final episode of the show too much. Now sure, it's a far out idea, I'll admit, but come on. I can't be the only one who felt that relegating Infinity Ultron to the confines of a Disney Plus show and not letting him go toe-to-toe with the biggest and greatest heroes within the MCU in a proper movie was kind of a bit of a waste. So maybe this is one time when giving a villain a do-over would be appropriate. Or I guess we could just go with some of the related villains that episode potentially set up. So in the 9th episode of that show, we saw Ultron's digital consciousness getting taken out by the computerized version of Armin Zola. At the moment, this seemed like an absolute win. However, it is worth remembering who exactly Armin Zola was. Once you take a second and realize that the dude was one of the key figures within Hydra back during World War II, suddenly the idea of having him in control of a vibranium deathbot with access to the Infinity Stones isn't such a great idea after all. Okay, sure, he probably wouldn't be quite as genocidal as Ultron, and more on the, hey, I'm gonna go ahead and rule all of you now instead of reducing you to dust side of things, but still, it's not ideal. Now as it stands, he is currently trapped within a pocket dimension, being watched over presumably for all time by Strange Supreme, the alternate reality version of Doctor Strange that gained enough power to become cosmically aware. So yeah, his return isn't exactly what I would call likely. However, it would certainly be a pretty major next step in the story of Armin Zola, a character that Marvel keeps bringing back for some reason pretty much whenever they get the chance. You know, trapped inside that pocket dimension alongside Armin Zola is actually yet another former villain that could fit the bill pretty handedly if he were to ever get out of that soccer ball from hell. Eric Stevens, aka Black Panther, aka Killmonger. Killmonger is often regarded as one of, if not the best villain the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ever given us. Who would have thought that the key to making a villain audiences enjoy was to simply make one that we could sympathize with on some level? Funny that. And it would seem that this alternate reality version is cut from the same cloth, based upon what he had to say when he took over Infinity Ultron's armor after the bot was beaten.
The Watcher owes us this. With these stones, we could fix our worlds.
What could an Infinity Killmonger look like? A version of the character who has the means to achieve all of his lofty goals while also being aware of the larger multiverse? A Killmonger who seeks his own brand of justice for not just one Earth, but all Earths? That is a kind of terrifying prospect, actually. Of course, that would all hinge on his ability to get out of that pocket dimension. which does seem kind of unlikely, seeing as he is being watched over by perhaps the strongest version of the Sorcerer Supreme ever, one capable of taking hits from the Infinity Stones on the chin without breaking a sweat. So, you know, I'm not really going to be holding my breath for that one. But the character does have his fans, so you never know. So Loki here might seem like a little bit of a cop-out answer, since we've seen that variants of him all sort of just want to do right by the universe, just in the most arrogant and self-centered ways possible. However, think for a second what a truly evil version of the God of Mischief could look like. Now realize that whatever you just thought about in your head just now probably exists somewhere out in the wider multiverse. Despite being treated within the MCU as a sort of anti-hero, or at least a misunderstood character, within the character's long history in the comics, he has been presented as a straight-up bad guy more often than not. Heck, this is a dude who on numerous occasions straight up called himself the devil. Yeah, for a while in the 40s up until the 50s, he referred to himself as Satan, which was rather fitting considering he was banished to Hades by Zeus at one point around this time and took over as its ruler. So, just imagine for a second if Loki, while dealing with the time travel multiverse shenanigans of the TVA, were to come into contact with a more devilish version of himself, allowing this pure evil Loki to become aware of the multiverse as a whole. Suddenly, we have a potential threat on the horizon that someone at some point will probably have to deal with, be it the Avengers or the Guardians of the Multiverse, whoever. Either way, he could kinda be a big deal. Okay, so Hulk isn't really a villain. In fact, now that he has figured out the whole sharing a body thing with Bruce Banner, he's pretty much as much of a hero as he can possibly be. However, that's just the version we've seen within the MCU. And even then, to people outside of the Avengers, the Hulk is a rather terrifying prospect. A big green ball of pure rage who can smash basically anything? Yeah, that's pretty scary. Now, imagine if Hulk was able to become souped up by a massive influx of radiation and took over Banner completely. You'd probably get the villainous tyrant that we saw in the future imperfect story arc in the comics, Maestro. Maestro was a version of the Hulk from an alternate reality where the vast majority of the world was destroyed by a nuclear war, leaving massive pockets of radiation everywhere. 100 years in the future, Hulk, who by this point had fully absorbed Banner's intelligence, was driven mad by all that he had lost, and he became a monstrous tyrant who ruled over the waste that was the former United States, crushing all those who opposed him, often quite literally. So yeah, he's not exactly what you would call a good guy, and it would seem that the MCU is definitely up to something in regards to the Hulk. During the end credits scene of Shang-Chi, Banner showed up briefly, but notice that it wasn't the Professor Hulk version. It was just normal, puny Banner. So something is going on with Hulk. Maybe he got separated somehow from Banner, and we will see a pure Hulk popping up sometime, perhaps as a proper villain. Or there's some other explanation that I'm just not thinking about right now. Could be that too, but who knows? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Okay, so Kang the Conqueror is, in a sense, also kind of a cop-out, since we are fairly certain that the main big bad of the Loki Disney Plus series is more than likely going to at least be the big bad of some parts of Phase 4, if not the whole thing. However, we've got to try to figure out which version of Kang would best fit the bill. So let's go through a few, shall we? First up, Iron Lad. This version is pretty much completely off the table for a few reasons. First and foremost being that this version is a hero, not a villain. So having him show up to turn heel on us doesn't exactly make the most sense. On top of that, if we do get an Iron Lad in the MCU, perhaps as part of the Young Avengers that we seem to be setting up, it'll probably either be Ironheart with Riri Williams in the suit, or that one kid from Iron Man 3. One or either or both, I guess. Next up is Immortus. This version of Kang was born on an Earth that was already touched by the hand of Kang, and as such, he was viewed as a sort of god. Growing up in that kind of environment gave him a bit of a superiority complex, which was raised to even greater extremes when he traveled back to ancient Egypt and became a pseudo-god in his own right there. This version of the character is pretty similar to the base form of Kang the Conqueror, probably due in large part to the fact that he would eventually mutate in such a way that he would discover that he was baseline Kang, only a younger version of it. So seeing someone like Immortus is definitely possible. Heck, the version that we saw in Loki could actually be Immortus, just pre-blueberry-ness. Then there is Robo-Kang, a version we saw in the Avengers United They Stand animated series. Now, despite the show not being exactly what you would call good, this version of Kang went a long way towards showing us that Kang doesn't always just have to be some random blue dude, but could come in many different forms. And a Robo-Kang could be massively threatening to the MCU, in much the same way that a being such as Infinity Ultron would be. While we're probably just gonna get baseline Kang, I'm throwing my support behind Robo-Kang. It's like the Terminator with a god complex. I love it. Phase 4 of the MCU may have actually already given us our big bad, in the guise of one of the bigger remaining heroes, Wanda Maximoff. While her motivations were quite understandable, what she did in WandaVision was nothing short of horrific once you actually think about it for longer than about 10 seconds. And based upon the final shots of that show, and what we know about her role in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, she isn't exactly looking like she learned anything from her experiences in Westview, New Jersey. It would honestly not surprise me if she continued to slide further down the rabbit hole, becoming more and more transfixed on getting what it is that she wants, no matter the cost. So while she may not wind up being necessarily a bad guy, she could at the very least become a major antagonist. There is a difference there. Couple that with the possibility of seeing an even darker version of her from some other part of the multiverse, perhaps scaring our Wanda straight in some way, suddenly we've got a very terrifying threat on our hands that will definitely need to be dealt with. For these last couple of possibilities, I kinda just want to throw out some of the funnier options I came up with while brainstorming this video. Kinda feel like we hit the more serious ones already, so let's just have some fun now. First up is Malekith from Thor: The Dark World. This dark elf with a chip on his shoulder is often considered by a lot of MCU fans as the worst villain within all of the Marvel movies, which is definitely saying something, since the MCU is kind of notorious for having not so great bad guys. I'm looking at you, Ronan. Don't think you weren't also considered for this slot. So giving the worst villain another chance to stink up the screen might seem like an odd choice. But think about it this way. Why not try to improve what wasn't so great before? Possibly even retroactively making his earlier appearance just a little bit better. What would a new version of him look like? Well, maybe there is a reality where he won out against Thor and managed to darken his universe. I can't imagine that after all of that, he'd just be fine with pulling a Thanos and retiring to some small hut somewhere. Nope, he'd probably set out to darken the entire multiverse, maybe with darker versions of the Infinity Stones that he gathered from his own universe, that are twisted in some way, making them an even bigger threat. Or maybe the 10 rings instead of the stones if we want to move away from the stones for a little bit, which I'm all for. There isn't really any precedence for this in the comics or any other media, but you know, wild and wacky speculation is kind of my thing. Who better to try to top the Mad Titan himself than an even madder Titan? The final shot of the zombie episode of What If showed us that, within that universe, there existed a version of Thanos that had access to almost all of the Infinity Stones, while also being a rabid zombie hungry for human flesh. So this would admittedly be at least a little bit lame. We basically just got done with Thanos, and now it's kind of time to move on. But you cannot tell me that a live-action Marvel Zombies doesn't sound at least a little bit appealing. And Zombie Thanos' story is presumably still ongoing, as he didn't pop up in the final episode of the show when Strange Supreme dropped a massive pile of zombies on top of Infinity Ultron. So maybe there is some sort of tale that can be told there. It's presumably something more fitting for the second season of What If, but you know, I just enjoyed the episode so much that I kind of figured he was at least worth bringing up while we're doing these sort of funnier entries at the end of this video. Finally, we come upon this one, which is a real stretch, but it's such a funny concept to me that I've had a hard time not including it. So one could argue that Silver Surfer is more of a hero than a villain. He certainly does some pretty heroic stuff from time to time. However, his association with Galactus kind of puts him on the darker side of things sometimes. Now, what if there was a universe where the Herald of Galactus wasn't the Silver Surfer, but the Golden Oldie, Aunt May herself? Yeah, in the comics, there was an issue where May Parker was granted the power Cosmic, turning her into a Golden Herald of Galactus. Now what if this alternate version was just plain pure evil, and came to Earth to alert the world of the coming of some sort of souped up, multiverse-hopping Galactus who totally doesn't look like a space fart? Likely? Heck no. Listen, as much as I'd like to see a solid gold Marissa Tomei, it's just not gonna happen. Still though, it's a funny prospect and A guy can dream, right? Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets, I'm the guy who made this video. I just want to know, if you could bring back a baddie, who would it be? Let me know in the comments below, or you can go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos in the future.